to get up. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and well done all of you for braving those dreadful elements. It's really nice to see you, and I hope that you're going to really enjoy yourself, because it's a fascinating talk we've got tonight. First of all, parish notices. The next talk is on the 3rd of November. It's Philip St Lawrence. He did a talk for us a couple of years ago, and this one is on, it's a Nelson talk. It's Emma, Nelson and Trafalgar, Triumph and Tragedy. So that's the 3rd of November. The Christmas party is the 1st of December. I'm not sure what time it will be at the moment. It did start earlier last year. So when the St Barbe bite comes round, make sure you have a look, because I think it was 5:30 or 5 o'clock last year. And that helps with people who don't want to be out too late. So that's the 1st of December. And we'll be mulling wine just for change. There's half terms coming up. We have the usual free trails and activities in the gallery. And also there is a workshop for, I think, 6-year-olds on textile printing on the Tuesday, and Halloween-themed craft for the 3-year-olds and above on the Wednesday. And I think you have to book for those two, but the other ones you can just walk in, and it's the usual trails, and there's 2 trails, and apparently they are getting Halloween-themed badges if they complete them, the littlies. So the last thing I want to say is that next year is Open Gardens. I know we're always asking for help, but if anybody knows of a garden in the Lymington area, so we're talking probably Pennington Roundabout down to the Quay, we would love to hear from you. And we will be sending round our usual requests for help and cakes. And it is our birthday next year, so we want to make it a really big one. So just keep an eye out for that. And if you do know a garden, we would love to hear from you. And also, Olivia, bless her, is going to run the plant stall this year, or next year. And she says, this is the time, apparently, this is the time you have to start subdividing your perennials and think of us when you're doing it. So I hope that means more to you than it does to me. What else is going on? The only other thing I need to say is the 14th of November, Amy Durrell is doing a workshop, a lino cut workshop to help you make your Christmas cards. It's direct booking with her. The links are on the website, and it's limited places. So if you're interested in that, then please let her know. Right, tonight's talk. Richard and Denise have really kindly lent us artworks for the Parallel Lives exhibition over the road. Richard Shillitoe is an expert and aficionado of Ithell Colquhoun. And I think he's nodding, I think I've got that right. They've come all the way from Yorkshire to see the exhibition, which is amazing. Richard spent his professional life in the National Health, and apparently he discovered Surrealism quite early on in his life. And this is according to your biography on the web. Steve sent it, so it must be right. And apparently he discovered Surrealism very early on, and discovered Ithell when he read one of her poems and assumed that her name was a surrealist joke. And there's a lovely quote here. Where is it? He thought the name was made up and dismissed the whole thing as a surrealist joke. He now concedes this was hasty. So anyway, he is going to talk to us. He's lent us 3 works, which is fantastic. And he's going to talk to us about what makes her tick, what's behind some of the imagery that she uses. And he has also written many books on the subject, and I'm sure this is going to be absolutely fantastic. Thank you very much. Or have you wired up? Yeah.
Thank you for those kind words, nearly all of which were true. And thank you all for braving the elements to get here tonight. It's not just the elements that you've braved, you've probably also braved the subject matter. Because to many people, surrealism is just a bunch of weird images. And to many people, magic is just a bunch of weird beliefs. And so tonight you're going to get a double dose of weird. You're getting surrealism and magic. So at the end of tonight, I will have either confirmed your worst fears about surrealism and magic, or I will have done something to perhaps assuage some of them. And the way that I'm going to try and do that is to immerse you all in the world of Ithell Colquhoun. And I'm going to do that by looking at a range of paintings and trying to explain to you why they look the way they do. I shall introduce you to some of her unusual spiritual beliefs, and I shall also tell you how she used her dreams in her creative work. I shall show you how and why she tried to bypass conscious decision-making when painting, and then we shall join her in some astral travelling. For those of you who make it back safely, we will conclude with a quick trip to paradise, where we will learn the true story of what really happened in the Garden of Eden. Now, where possible, I shall illustrate my points by discussing paintings that are currently on show in the Parallel Lives exhibition, starting with this one. This is on loan from the Ruth Borchardt collection. Ruth Borchardt was a German writer who came to England as a Jewish refugee before the Second World War. She set herself the task of making a collection of 100 self-portraits by living British artists. And she did it by simply writing to everyone she could think of, asking for something suitable, and pointing out that she would not pay a penny more than 21 guineas. I'm not sure how far she would get with that strategy today, but in the 50s and early 60s, it was surprisingly effective, and she completed her full set of 100, this one amongst them. When Colquhoun painted this, she was still a student at the Slade School of Art in London, so she'd be about 22 or 23 years old. People often comment about the hand gestures. They seem somewhat ambiguous. With one hand, she seems to be smoothing down her dress, and with the other, she seems to be hitching it up. She's certainly showing a lot more thigh than her mother would approve of. Some people think the right-hand gesture is making a ritual Hindu symbol, the Vitaka Mudra, but if she is, it's upside down. So on the whole, I think that's unlikely. But overall, this is more than just a student exercise in learning how to paint tonally, because it shows how early in her career several important ideas were already apparent in her work. One is the relationship between women and nature, and another is the importance to Colquhoun of boundaries. So you'll notice how she has deliberately seated herself on a shoreline, or perhaps an estuary, surrounded by rocks and churning water. It's a wild, marginal place, leached of almost all colour, where land and sea meet and clash. The foreshore, the intertidal zone, the ever-shifting boundary between earth and water, is a highly significant place for Colquhoun. Positioning herself there is no accident. It's evidence of her enduring interest in margins, with the edges of things, places where transitions occur, places where one thing stops being what it is and becomes something else. We shouldn't be surprised by this, because the repudiation of boundaries is a defining characteristic of the two main guidelines of Colquhoun's life, surrealism and magic. And here are a couple of quotations from the writings of André Breton, the founder and main theoretician of surrealism. Surrealism attempted to transform the world by challenging all conventional divisions. In the first quotation, as you might expect from someone steeped in Freud and dream theory, Breton specifically focuses upon the apparently separate natures of dreaming sleep and the waking state. he envisages a higher reality, a surreality, where these apparent opposites will be reconciled. And in the second quotation, he makes a more general commitment to overcoming differences. He looks forward to a time when the suggestion that the container will also be the contained will not seem paradoxical. And I compare those quotations with a sentence from one of the early writers on alchemy, not a household name, Zosimos of Panopolis, who was active in Egypt in the 4th century AD. Colquhoun quoted this passage in her very first publication, an article on alchemy which came out in 1930 when she was still at the Slade, so she must have been writing it when she was painting the self-portrait. Zosimos is created with introducing the phrase, the philosopher's stone, into the language, and the stone, of course, is the key to overcoming such opposites as life and death, worthless metals and precious gold. And you'll see that Zosimos expresses very similar thoughts to Breton, and he does so in a similarly teasing, paradoxical manner. There are several different schools of alchemy, and Colquhoun generally thought of it in terms not of physical transformation, of base metals into precious gold, but of spiritual transformation, transmuting our base and materialistic selves into more exalted and worthy beings. So it's a kind of metaphor for a spiritual journey to enlightenment. Now, having just mentioned a spiritual journey, this might be the time to introduce you to the range of Colquhoun's spiritual beliefs. She was an unusually active and eclectic seeker after truth. So here's a list of some of the spiritual organizations that she attempted to join, or that she was a member of at one time or another. It's quite a list, and you can relax. I'm not going to explain them all one by one, but some are well known, some are completely obscure, and the third one up from the bottom, as well as being completely obscure, is also completely unpronounceable. You can probably tell it's a Druid order, as is the one immediately above it, which is based in Brittany. Now, Colquhoun is generally thought of as an occultist, that is, as someone who practices ceremonial magic or practical magic, such as making talismans, casting spells, performance of rituals designed to contact spirits and deities. And it's true that she did all of these things. But as the list shows, that's just part of the story. Her interests took in Freemasonry, Druidry, mystical Christianity, ancient British paganism, and veneration of the Great Mother Goddess. The fifth one down, the Order of the Pyramid and Sphinx, had a special interest in the magic of Enoch, the complicated system revealed to John Dee, the astrologer to Queen Elizabeth I. People have been struggling to make sense of it ever since. But Enochian, as you may know, is the language spoken by angels, but it's yet to find its way into the national curriculum. Now, I'm going to give you an example of how she tried to bring together these multiple and separate routes to enlightenment and how she incorporated them into her art. This is the Menon Toll, a prehistoric monument in the Cornish moors, not far from where Colquhoun lived for the latter part of her life. The name simply means whole stone. This is what it looks like to the eye of the camera, and the next slide shows what it looks like to Colquhoun to the eye of the visionary. Sadly, it's not in the exhibition, but the title refers to the folklore belief that climbing through the central hole is a cure for infertility in women. It's an obvious symbolic birthing ritual. As the title suggests, it's best to do this at night, when male solar energies will be at their weakest and female lunar energies will be at their strongest. The lines of force that you can see zinging between the stones are clearly psychic energies that arise from the depths of the earth. Colquhoun called them fountains out of Hecate, the great Earth Mother, But there's more to it than that. Here's a study for the painting, a preparatory drawing, and it shows a woman performing the fertility ritual. If you look at the outline of the body as it moves between the stones, and hold it in your mind as we go back to the painting, I hope you can see what you may have not spotted before, that the energy lines between the stones form a human body. Now, these lines in Hindu philosophy represent the nadi, the inner structure of intersecting channels which run along the body and allow it to receive and distribute vital energies that arise from deep within the earth. There are said to be 3 nadi, and they are traditionally coloured deep blue, crimson and yellow, as they are here. You can see as well, I hope, that they come together at nodal points. These correspond to the Eastern idea of the chakras, the hidden energy centres of the body. So overall, Sunset Birth manages to combine elements of Cornish folklore, earth magic and tantric content. It's a good example of Colquhoun's willingness to integrate diverse spiritual traditions. She did this because she thought that any one belief system can only possess a partial and incomplete understanding of the truth. And in seeking a full understanding of the Creator's purpose, a broad search was essential. So, time now for a little background about Colquhoun herself. She was born in India, where her father was a senior colonial administrator. Like many such families, Colquhoun's parents remained in India, while she and her brother were brought up in the UK. In their case, it was initially on the Isle of Wight by an elderly aunt. And here she is with her brother. They look the epitome of pre-First World War middle-class respectability. But already, Ithell's imaginative powers and mystical leanings were very much in evidence. Looking back on her childhood, she later wrote that at the age of 5, she knew, note the certainty, she knew, not pretended, not make-believe, she knew that a large red tomato was full of Christ's blood. Whether we take that at face value or not, it's a striking remark for a 5-year-old to have made. On her father's retirement, the family moved to Cheltenham, where she attended the Ladies' College. After a spell at the local art college, she went to the Slade, where her professor, Henry Tonks, said she was one of the most gifted students they had ever had. But he worried that she would become diverted from her art and go down strange mystical byways. He wrote to her once, "You go out to gather strawberries, but come back with 2 strange beetles and a spider instead." And I think she would have regarded that as a compliment, but coming from him, I think it was an insult. They kept in touch for a couple of years after she qualified, but in the end he got fed up of her and said, "Quit moaning, just get on with it." Although he put it rather more sensitively than that. That was the gist of his message. Now, this watercolour was painted 2 years after she graduated. The first time it was seen in public was at Colquhoun's first one-person show, which was in Cheltenham in 1936, and now it's across the road in the exhibition. It's a naturalistic study of the sort she had been sketching ever since she was a young teenager, finding inspiration in the natural world around her. One of the difficulties we have living at a time where everyone has heard of Freudian symbols is that it becomes very hard not to see things as a Freudian, which usually means a sexual, symbol. Fortunately, that's not a problem with Colquhoun, because pretty much everything you see is a sexual symbol. So you might wonder about those tall semi-erect stems of the Star of Bethlehem rising up, waving their heads. But on the basis of this one work alone, you probably wouldn't want to wonder too loudly. But then, only a short time later, the sexuality of her plant imagery has become inescapable. The heart-shaped leaf, the erect and drooping stems, the way in which the tip of the leaf almost brushes the top of the growing shoot, all fill the painting with erotic innuendo. It's painted in what she later called her magic realism or super realism style, where everything is enlarged, magnified, and exaggerated. It only lasted a couple of years until she absorbed the lessons of Surrealism, but whilst it did, she produced a small number of erotically charged flower paintings, and this is one of them. This was sold last year for £250,000 and has since left the country, so sadly that couldn't be included in the exhibition. But this one is. The 1930s were also a time of extensive travel in the Mediterranean, drawing and painting local scenes. They were all, except one, in watercolour, and this is the exception, the only one in oil paint, so it's clearly an important work, and it's here in the exhibition. At first sight, it looks bland, but it's one of her most enigmatic paintings. The puzzle is, how are we to explain the mysterious rivulets of coloured fluids that trickle down the steps? Presumably, these are the tepid waters which give the painting its name. But what are they, and how are they connected to what is happening inside the building? Well, first of all, it's a church, and it happens to be in Corsica, in the Ile Rousse district of the north of Corsica. The mystery that takes place inside a church is, of course, a spiritual one, bridging through faith, prayer, and ritual the void between humankind and God that has existed since the fall. It's the mystery of the reattainment of harmony and oneness. For Colquhoun, and this is another key concept coming up, harmony and oneness meant the reunification of the two separate genders into one, a return to the perfect, undivided state that had existed before the fall. Colquhoun's understanding was that Adam, in the Garden of Eden, was made in God's image and was therefore an androgynous or perhaps hermaphroditic being. His fall from grace was signified by his splitting into the two separate genders that exist today. Accordingly, redemption can only occur when the duality of gender is overcome. The separate genders are reunited, and humankind can return to a state of unity that had once existed in paradise. And that's what she's getting at here. And she's given it a peculiar alchemical twist. I say that because the mysterious rivulets are painted in colours which have traditional alchemical gender associations. Red is the traditional colour of the element of fire, and fire is always regarded as a male element. Here it is paired with yellow. This is the colour of what alchemists sometimes term philosophic sulphur, a sort of mysterious male essence. Blue is the colour of the female element, water, and here it is paired with white, which is the colour of philosophic mercury, the mysterious female essence. Finally, in the foreground, the pairs come together and the genders unite and regain their prelapsarian unity. But it still looks odd. By this time, 1939, Colquhoun had discovered Surrealism and had become a member of the Surrealist group in London. Her formal relations with the group were short-lived and fractious. She was expelled for refusing to compromise her occult activities. A short-lived marriage to an Italian called Tony Del Renzio didn't help either. Unfortunately for them both, he had aspirations to lead the Surrealist group himself, so division and acrimony deepened even further. But Surrealism exerted a deep and lasting influence. This is probably one of her most famous paintings, and for many years it was the only oil painting that you could see by her in London. In fact, it was the only, and remains the only, oil painting that Tate have ever bought. Everything else has been gifts. The first artist to influence her work was Salvador Dali, and his use of what we generally refer to nowadays as the double image. That is to say, painting objects in such a way that they are clearly what they are, but they are at the same time, simultaneously, also something completely different. They retain their original identity while simultaneously acquiring another. And Colquhoun has made very effective use of it in this painting, which dates from 1938. According to legend, Scylla started life as a beautiful sea nymph. She was turned into a raging monster as a result of sexual jealousy among the gods. To gain revenge, she devoured all sailors who came within her reach. If you know the painting, you may also know that it was inspired by what Colquhoun could see of her legs and lower torso while she was lying in the bath. So as a double image, the rocky pillars are simultaneously her thighs, and the seaweed is her pubic hair. So it's partly a self-portrait. Just as she had done in the Borchardt self-portrait, Colquhoun has linked herself to nature, but here she has taken it a stage further. She remains a woman, but she has also become part of the fabric of the earth, part of the seabed. Women, she is saying, have an inseparable affinity with nature. It's also a comment on the strength of women. Scylla, conventionally thought of as a monster, is portrayed here as a powerful sexual female. She lures the sailors, all men of course, in their puny phallic boat to their doom between her rocky thighs. Here is another double image. Compared with the positive affirmation between women and nature that we saw in Scylla, whenever Colquhoun deals with men, their link with nature is very different, and there is always more than a hint of mockery. A limp sardine is hardly the image of virility that men might like to project. The painting always raises a smile, but there's a serious side to it. And once again, it's about overcoming gender differences. Colquhoun establishes a visual equivalence between eggs and testicles. Each play a key role in reproduction, although they obviously belong to and help define the two genders. Colquhoun has merged them into one, into what she often called the androgynous egg or the hermaphrodite whole. So pictorially and conceptually, she has achieved the unification of the separate genders. She spent part of the summer of 1939 in France. Whilst in Paris, she had her portrait photograph taken by the American photographer Man Ray. Man Ray didn't provide props in his studio, so we have to imagine Colquhoun walking through the streets of Paris carrying her sheaf of wheat. She has chosen to have herself photographed as a modern Demeter or Ceres, the corn goddess who presides over the fruitfulness of the earth. There's a clear progression here, from posing in a landscape, as she did in the Borchardt self-portrait, becoming part of the landscape, as she did in Scylla. She has ended up as a goddess ruling the earth's fecundity. In 10 years, she's gone from being an art student sitting on a rock to being the goddess of fertility. That's a CV that anyone could be proud of. The most enduring legacy of Colquhoun's trip to France was her adoption of automatic methods of painting. By automatic, I mean painting with a complete suspension of conscious control. Surrealists did this in an effort to gain access to their unconscious mind. Colquhoun was also familiar with the use of automatic drawing and writing by spiritualists and mediums to contact other realms. So she believed that the source of automatic images could be the personal unconscious, but it could also be non-human forces and entities. I'm going to show you some examples of automatic painting and drawing before concentrating on several that are in the exhibition. Here she is demonstrating a process called fumage. It simply means smoke. She's moving a sheet of paper above a candle flame in order to leave sooty deposits that trace her movements. You might think her movements are spontaneous and random. She might think that there is a hidden force providing guidance. She then gazed at the smoky deposits, waiting for an image to emerge, one which she could then elaborate upon. And here's an example. You should be able to make out the smoky traces in the background, and she's coloured in some of them. And she's also discovered a figure which has a crystal at its centre. In view of the title, which is a reference to alchemical transformation, perhaps the crystal is the philosopher's stone. This one started not with smoke, but with patches of watercolour and swirling lines of pen and ink. During the interpretive phase, she's elaborated a supine figure along the bottom with the feet to the right. The three rising, swirling forms almost certainly refer to the esoteric tradition that the soul leaves the body from three different locations at the moment of death. You'll remember we met the colours of red, yellow and blue before as the colours of the nadi. In Sunset Birth, we saw life at the point of entering the body. Here we see it leaving it. This one is 30 years later. Some of you may have seen it before. It was in the Disquieting Landscapes exhibition here a couple of years ago. It's an example of what's called stilomancy, a kind of automatism that produces a symmetrical image. To make it, she spread coloured inks onto a sheet of paper, which she then blotted by folding it in half. It's a technique used for the Rorschach ink blots. On opening it up, she's discovered a dryad, a nymph that inhabits the tree, in this case an oak. The tree is obviously a living thing, home to living creatures, some of which you can see in the branches. But there also seems to be some blurring of biological boundaries. The trunk has structures that are more akin to mammalian organs than the cells of trees. Colquhoun is hinting at the underlying unity of nature that she believed transcended scientific biological categories. Colquhoun regarded this one as one of her masterpieces. If you wanted to see it last year, you'd have had to go all the way to Venice to the Biennale. If you want to see it tomorrow, just pop across the road. In Greek mythology, the Gorgons were three sisters. Their gaze was so terrifying that a mortal who looked into their eyes was turned to stone. Medusa, the chief of the three, had hair of writhing serpents. It's an example of a technique called decalcomania, a process in which blobs of oil paint are squashed between two surfaces. After separating the two parts and putting aside the negative, she then added a background and refined the forms, although they still remain ambiguous. If you do see it, you'll notice the marvellous ridges and fissures where she's pulled the two pieces of paper apart. You can almost hear the gloop as the paint and paper separates. Now, this ambiguity allows viewers to project their own interpretations into the painting. These personal reactions are constantly being refreshed and renewed because they will be coloured by your mood and your current circumstances. So, for example, a friend couldn't bear to look at Gorgon following a hysterectomy. On the other hand, my mother-in-law, who had been brought up on a farm, always said she saw chicken giblets. My mother-in-law couldn't get the hang of automatism and surrealism at all and thought her daughter had made a grave mistake in marrying me. But fortunately, over 50 years later, Gorgon and I are still happily together, as indeed are her daughter and I. Anyway, the point about automatism is to remove deliberate decision-making from the initial production of the image. Although Colquhoun's automatic works are spontaneous, to a certain extent they are planned, in the perhaps trite sense that she deliberately opened her sketchbook or selected a sheet of paper or lit her candle with a specific purpose of making a drawing or contacting external forces. There is a way of eliminating, or at least minimizing, even that stage, and that is to make drawing incidental to doing something else, and perhaps being only partly aware of what you are doing. I'm talking about doodling, except Colquhoun didn't call it doodling, she called it graphomania. And there's an example in the exhibition. She seemed to have been a tireless doodler or graphomaniac, constantly drawing on the margins of newspapers, in the corner of envelopes, on sheets of used notepaper. Many people doodle, but few carefully cut them out and preserve them, which is what Colquhoun did. There's a large envelope of them in the Tate archives, absolutely full of them. And in 1971, she used some to make a series of montages, and this one is in the exhibition. When you see it, you will notice that it's signed lower centre, not with her name, but with a device formed by the letters S and V set inside an oval and followed by the date. You can just see it on the centre of the slide, right at the centre on the lower edge is the kind of oval. But you have to look for it on the montage as well. It's not obvious that it's there at all. So here's a much larger version for you that she did the following year when she was trying to work out the cover design for an exhibition she was holding. It's a monogram formed from her magical name. It's a tradition in many spiritual organizations for a person to adopt a new name when they join or when they achieve a certain status. It symbolizes their new spiritual identity or purpose. So W.B. Yeats, the poet, who was a leading figure in the Golden Dawn, took the name Demon est Deus inversus, the devil is the reverse of God, when he joined the Golden Dawn, one of the most celebrated of the Victorian magical orders. From a rather different tradition, Albino Luciani took the name John Paul in 1978 when he was elected Pope. When Colquhoun started studying with an occultist named Kenneth Clark in the early... Kenneth Grant, not Kenneth Clark, for goodness sake. Kenneth Grant in the early 50s, she chose to be known as Splendidior Vitro, clearer than crystal, indicating that her magical purpose was her search for clarity and purity. And that's how she signed all the artwork she produced after 1962. It signifies that for her, art and magic were one. Now, the next work I'm going to show is the polar opposite to the graphomania, because although it uses the spontaneity of automatism, there's a lot of deliberation as well. So let me start with the setting. This is an aerial view of St Agnes, one of the Scilly Isles that lie off the coast of Cornwall. Colquhoun knew the Scillies well. After the difficulties with the Surrealists in London, She found herself at an impasse which wasn't really resolved till she moved to Cornwall permanently in the 1950s. And there, for the first time in her life, she began to feel a sense of belonging. Surrounded by holy wells, wayside crosses, megaliths and stone circles, Cornwall is a place of ancient and concentrated spirituality. The island of St Agnes divides into two smaller islands at every high tide and becomes whole again at every low tide. You can see where the division takes place at the sandbar in the photograph. The large portion of the island on the left contains a holy well dedicated to one of the lesser-known Cornish female saints, Santa Warna. On the smaller island on the right, there is a standing stone known locally as the Old Man. And here they are. Colquhoun understood wells and springs to be female symbols, portals where female energies rise up from the body of Hecate, the great earth goddess. The Old Man is clearly a male symbol. Whenever you see a standing stone in Colquhoun's art, you can be sure that something consensual is going on between it and Mother Earth. She incorporated both well and stone into one of her more poetic paintings of the relationship between male and female. And here it is, and it's in the exhibition. With the outward-facing eye, the well itself is not much to look at, but with her inner eye, Colquhoun has seen a much more imposing structure, a place where the energies and waters gush and coalesce into the figure of the saint atop a flight of steps. It looks a bit dark in the slide, but it's much clearer when you see it in the flesh. The standing stone is much more naturalistic. So she shows us the two islands copulating. Male and female come together and separate and come together in perpetuity with the ebbing and flowing of the tides. Now, by now, we should be used to the idea that women have a close and magical association with the land, but just in case we are not, let me summarise Colquhoun's second novel, I Saw Water. Like all of her three novels, it's set on an island. Most of the action takes place in a Catholic convent, where the nuns have all taken a male name alongside their female to signify, in Colquhoun's words, the purity of the hermaphrodite. The dawning realization by the nuns that they are all dead forms the substance of the plot. Not only are they all dead, they belong to the rather un-Catholic order of the parthenogenicists, but their devotions are thwarted because everyone has forgotten how parthenogenesis, which is a kind of asexual reproduction, actually works. At the climax of the novel, the heroine leaves her convent home, jettisons all her possessions, discards her name, casts off her personality, abandons her memories, and finds peace by burrowing into the warm sands of the foreshore, where she remains, existing in a sort of eternal present, awaiting her next reincarnation. As Colquhoun's heroines typically do, she has become mystically and physically identified with the living earth. Now, I think I'm getting a bit behind time. There's two further topics I want to discuss briefly before wrapping things up with a quick trip to paradise. We'll certainly be over by past. Is it all right if I plod on, or do you want me to skip a bit? Keep going. Thank you. That's all I need to know. Right. These are pages from one of her dream diaries. Her views on dreams were highly eclectic. For a start, she accepted Freud's view that through her dreams she could access her unconscious mind. She also accepted the Jungian view that through her dreams she could access shared ancestral memories stored deep within us all from the distant past. She also thought that some dreams contain memories of astral travels undertaken during sleep. Additionally, she accepted the old Mesopotamian view that dreams were coded messages from the gods and could give us guidance, if only we could work out reliably what they meant. And she thought that dreams could foretell the future. The predictive power of dreams is not an easy position to maintain if you believe, like most of us, that time is linear. This was not a problem for Colquhoun, who thought that the future is simply the present viewed from somewhere else. Don't fall into the trap of thinking that dreams are free from danger. A dream, whilst providing the dreamer with a route into other worlds, also opens a channel in the reverse direction, and not every visitor from beyond may be well-intentioned. The idea of a dream as a threatening two-way portal lies behind this painting. Usually, in Colquhoun's world, portals are benign, but sometimes they are menacing. In her dream diaries, she recalled several instances of waking up and finding bite marks on her body, caused, she believed, by feral astral werewolves. She made this painting following a dream she had when she was staying at a haunted inn in Wales. To me, it looks like a large suppurating wound opening up on a hillside, and it's difficult to imagine that any of the powers that may want to travel through have a benevolent reason for doing so. On now to astral travel. In 1967, she spent a year in systematic study of individual cards of the tarot pack. She tried to get to know them inside out, and I mean that literally from the inside, and this is what she did. Every week, she would choose a card for study, but before proceeding any further, she would perform a traditional magical ritual known as the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram. It used to be secret, but it's all over the internet. The ritual is designed to clear the air, ritually, of any impure spirits and make her working place safe. She would trace pentagrams in the air, recite divine names, turn to the 4 cardinal points of the compass in turn, and evoke the appropriate archangel to protect her. When she felt safe, she would settle herself and begin to study the card, steeping herself in its symbolism, its imagery, and its colours. When she felt fully immersed in the card, she would step into it. She would step into it and begin to look around, exploring it, as I say, from the inside. This sounds odd, but it's an old magical practice. To find out more, back to Google again and look up scrying in the spirit vision. When she entered the magician card, she had a good look round and then engaged the magician in conversation. And at one point, she asked him for some advice. This always makes me think of psychotherapy. If you ask a therapist a direct question, you never get a direct answer. Personally, I never said anything to a patient as gnomic as the answer is the pole of poles, but looking back, I can think of times when I rather wish I had. As you can see, Colquhoun was able to make sense out of his cryptic reply. She was able to conclude that combining art and writing and magic made a coherent whole, and it was okay for her to carry on. The Magus has given her validation for her chosen way of life. Well, I'm drawing to a close, so let's take stock. So far, we've had messages from the gods and conversations with a tarot card. We've had 2 copulating land masses and penetrative sex with Mother Earth by standing stones. We've had hermaphroditism, we've had androgyny, and we've had parthenogenesis. It's all getting a bit much for a Friday evening. even perhaps for Lymington. So I shall finish by taking you full circle back to the beginning. And I don't mean the beginning of this talk, and I don't mean the beginning of her career, I mean right back to the beginning of time, to life in paradise before all this troublesome business with sex and gender began. It's a striking image, but what on earth is going on? And who is this second Adam? Most people can probably only think of one, although the Apostle Paul, in his second letter to the Corinthians, called Jesus the last Adam, suggesting that there were at least two. And Helen Blavatsky, the founder of the Theosophists, said she knew of 5, although one, the protoplastic Adam, was without form or material substance, so it's unlikely to be him. Fortunately for us, an annotated study exists, and it gives us all the clues. I'm not sure if you can read the writing at the top left there, but what it says is Adam androgyne, which clarifies that we are in the Garden of Eden, before Eve, and before, therefore, the appearance of gender. Antoinette de Bourignon was a 17th century Flemish mystic. She had started out by running a school, but a pupil inconveniently died. No Ofsted in those days, no special measures. She simply legged it and set herself up as an itinerant visionary preacher. She would arrive outside a city's walls with some followers and a portable printing press, print off something heretical and move on before the city authorities could react. And this is one of her visions. Antoinette's revelation is that Adam decides to construct a companion to join him in praising the Lord. This takes place in paradise, don't forget, a place where there is nothing as vulgar as waste matter, and so Adam has no need for bowels. Instead of intestines, he has a small alchemical laboratory, and it's here that he brews up his creation. Then comes the tricky part. How is he to give birth to his progeny? Well, existing at a time before gender and before secondary sexual characteristics, Adam has no penis. For reasons which Antoinette doesn't make clear, what he has in its place is a second nose. And to give birth, Adam simply sneezes him out through this lower nose. God is most impressed by all of this and takes the infant up to heaven to sit by his side. In due course, when he judges the time is right, God implants him in Mary, who subsequently gives birth, but this time through the usual channel. I don't know why, but they never mention any of this on Thought for the Day, but that's the true story of the origins of Jesus, the second Adam, as revealed to Antoinette and painted by Ithell. And on that inspiring note, it's time for us to leave paradise and make the short journey back to Lymington. Thank you for listening.
I don't know whether I would love to meet Ithell or I would run a mile from meeting her. She's certainly a complex character and probably needed to live. I don't know how she would cope with living now.
She would hate it. Absolutely hate it.
Would she like wokeism or would she hate it?
Well, she was the daughter of a senior colonial official, and she held what we would regard perhaps as inappropriate, antiquated social ideas. But what she would have disliked most is industrialization and noise. She was extremely irritated by noise. In fact, in her will, one of her beneficiaries is the Noise Abatement Society. I think whether you enjoyed her presence or found her intimidating would depend in part on the circumstances under which you met her.
Yeah.
She could be a delightful companion, but she could also be extraordinarily irritating. And people there are records of people saying, "Oh, for God's sake, give it a rest." So yeah, and that's why I think a lot of the magical societies wouldn't have her. She was threatening. Now, Denise and I did meet her. We went to see her at her studio, and she was all charm. I used to say that she was an old woman, but she was younger then than I am now, so I'm having to reframe all that.
All time is relative.
But she showed us round the studio, gave us some undrinkable tea, and sold us a painting, which is across the road now, Linked Island. She took it off her wall and sold it to us.
Well, certainly having met her in your amazing talk, I shall go and look at her paintings again with a completely different eye. Now, have we got any questions, or are you all... Would you like to speak?
Can I ask why you became interested in Ithell's work in the first place?
I've always been interested in Surrealism, and ever since I was at school. And as the chair mentioned at the beginning, I came across the name, and although I thought it was an entirely fictitious name, there was something about the name that I found extraordinarily captivating. It's a weird... like everybody else, I didn't know how to pronounce it, even assuming... And I didn't even know whether it was male or female. But in the course of time, I found answers to those. And I was attracted by the automatic paintings. We bought Gorgon in 1976, long time ago. And as soon as I saw it, I knew that I wasn't going to leave the gallery without it. And so it appeals in a kind of visceral level, I think, which is really difficult to put into words. And she was always very keen on responding at a visceral rather than an intellectual level. She thought our responses, if they were worth anything, had to come from the non-verbal, non-cognitive side of the brain. She was very cross with the Pope when he authorised the saying of the Mass in English, because everyone could understand it. And that wasn't a comment on vulgarising it, as you might say. It was a comment on, if the Mass means anything, it means something at a non-verbal level. It speaks to deeper levels of us. And it was that brought me into trying to find out more about her beliefs, which I regard as utterly bizarre, really. I've not fallen into the trap of, assuming it is a trap, of wanting to follow her in those ways at all. But you might think it's completely bonkers, but it's not just her being bonkers. There are a lot of people who believe the sort of things that she believed and take it very seriously. And I'm aware that we're in a church and people have strange beliefs that they give vent to in different churches.
She was too young to sort of engage with, I suppose, the first great age of theosophy, Gurdjieff and people like that. But when it came to the 60s, and so many individuals were sort of engaging in various mystical activities, everything from the Maharishi through to, obsession with Hermann Hesse. Did she pick up on any of this, or had she reached an age where really she wasn't that au fait with sort of counterculture interest in mysticism?
Yes. She was between those two extremes, wasn't she, when she was in the prime of her life. She was certainly a member of the Theosophical Society and attended various meetings, and a lot of the theosophical beliefs are reflected in her work. I think her beliefs were largely fully formulated by the time the 60s came round. The centre point of her beliefs was the Kabbalah, the medieval Jewish mysticism, and all the consequences of that. But that she built up on the Freemasonry and the Druidry, and later the Fellowship of Isis, which she was almost a founder member of. So she kept expanding, but at the heart was the was the capital. She was very critical of a later generation of mystical writers. Colin Wilson, for example, she thought that he missed the point completely. John Michel, the View Over Atlantis chap, she reviewed his books and thought that he was playing fast and loose with numbers. She believed in, is it pronounced gematria or gematria, the power of numbers, but thought that he was busy rounding them up or rounding them down, and that really wasn't on at all. She was very stringent, and however, whatever you think of it, she was completely consistent right throughout her life.
The exhibition's on till January the 13th. I think we all need to go and have a revisit of it. Buy the catalogue for Christmas, we need the money. And thank you very, very much, Richard, for tonight's talk.
You're welcome.
It's been amazing. I still don't know whether I want to meet you or not.
Well,
it probably depends on how many glasses of red wine I have at the time. Thank you very, very much indeed.
People do say they meet her. Even now, there was a chap, we better turn this off. There's been a lot of fuss about her copyright because there's been it's divided in 6 different ways, and people have lied about it and been confused about it and said inconsistent things in different ways. And one chap wanted to publish some of her works and cut through it all by simply saying, well, he'd been to visit her astrally and she'd given him permission. So you can't argue with that. Well, for the High Court you perhaps could.
On that note, many, many thanks.
Thank you.